I'm one of the best Catan players, and I'll show you how to win. I've analyzed hundreds of games from other top players and discovered what strategies they use. Stick around and you'll learn how to outthink and outskill the competition. In today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to break down a game from one of the top players in the world, Hangmain here. I'll put their credentials up on the screen. Basically, they're one of the top players in the world, and we're going to see what we can learn from watching and analyzing their game. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So when we look at this board, we see it has great ore, not so great wheat, sheep is fine, and wood and brick here are both pretty decent as well. So if I was red and I had the first pick here, I'd probably go for this 8-4-10. You get the strong ore, you get pretty decent wheat, and there's a good chance you get this expansion here into the 5-9-10. And they pick correctly. In terms of the second pick, I think something around this 8-4-3 is really good. By taking the 8-4-3, you can match your opponent's strong ore, you get some of the pretty rare brick, you pick up a little bit of wheat, and you block out this 6-4-3 out for your opponent. To pair with the 8-4-3, what I thought originally was take the 6-5-11. You can build into the sheep here, you can build into the sheep here. It's a little bit slow, but once you get your settles down, you're in a really good spot. Black here decides to take the 5-4-11 instead of the 6-5-11. They sacrifice the wood for a little bit more security in their expansions, and they get to start with the sheep this way. After looking at it a little bit harder, I tend to agree with this over the 6-5-11. The 6-5-11 can be a little bit too greedy, and you still have a really good game with this setup. They decide to point down, which I wouldn't say is incorrect, but it's not, in my personal opinion, it's not the most optimal play. So now we'll go through the replay and see what we can learn. So red drops a road here, pretty standard. I probably would have dropped the road to this spot, but it doesn't make a huge difference. You get that second wheat source regardless. So here, black decides to take the development card when it wasn't forced. And by forced, I mean they have no rolls to put them over 9. So as far as I can tell, the reason they decide to take the development card is in case they get any utility. That is a mono, that is a row builder, that is a year of plenty, to potentially plow this spot and force the wasted road here. Unfortunately for them, they get the VP, which is just not useful in any way at the start of the game. So now they have the city in hand, and they decide to take it, probably because there's been a lot of 7s already, so there's no real reason to hold it. Another reason is the 4's been light, so hopefully you can benefit here and get a 4 roll and get a road settle somewhere. The 7 does roll after I just said that, but it's not awful. They will get blocked here, but their opponent will lose half their hand, and that's pretty big at the start of the game. Now, they have the perfect road settle here. I know what I would do, and I know what they're going to do, but before I move forward, pause the video and think of what you would do in this situation. They decide to take the 9-4-3 settle over the 8-10 settle. There's a couple different reasons. The main reason is the 8 ore is currently blocked, and there's been a ton of 7s already, so you're probably not going to be able to unblock the 8. Furthermore, you have no card, so the 3-for-1 is pretty useless right now. So really, it's a matter of getting the 9-4-3 over the 10. It's just math, that's all it is. This 9-4-3 settle is always the correct play. Now black's at 9 cards, they're forced to drop a road. Even though the 8 ore is blocked, the road has to be for the 3-for-1. It's a great settlement spot. You get the 3-for-1, and this 10-3 and 9-11 settles aren't really doing anything for you. Unfortunately, they 7 out here, and they discard 3 wheat, a sheep, and a brick. I disagree with this. If I were them, I'd keep 2 sheep, 2 wheat, and a brick. This way, if a 9 rolls or an 11 rolls, you have your settle. Furthermore, keeping 3 sheep and 2 wheat over, let's say, 3 wheat and 2 sheep doesn't make much sense. Wheat is a much more flexible card. You can city, you can buy development card, and you can settle. You can only settle and buy development card with sheep. So in general, when the production is about equal between sheep and wheat, You want to have more wheat. In this spot, if they had kept the brick, they would have had to settle. Now, it's not a huge difference, but this is one of the only mistakes that I found during the entire game. They might think otherwise, but personally, I do think it was a slight inaccuracy to discard the brick instead of keeping it for the settle. They decide to use their Year of Plenty to get the city. I think this is a fine move. You don't produce a ton of wheat, and it's the most valuable resource. So to use the Year of Plenty for it, it makes sense. On this turn, they decide to settle on the 3-for-1 and then use the 3-for-1 to buy development card. Normally, I don't love porting the wheat for ore here, but since the 8 is blocked and your opponent could have another knight, it's not a bad idea to start trying to buy and trying to get knights of your own to battle for army. This is a huge play by red, securing them a very strong road network and giving them the edge to get longest road this game. To reduce their hand, they decide to point a road towards the 5-10. This is a good expansion for a few different reasons. You double the sheep, you get more ore, and you keep your road integrity alive, which means you keep the max length at 15 roads. They decide to port the sheep and buy a development card, and they get a monopoly. This is huge. Expect them to use the monopoly pretty soon if that 8 rolls, so they can get pacing on army and give them a chance to win the game. This is a very interesting hand, but before we can even talk about that, let's talk about the decision to hold the knight. They do so because they're over 9 cards, and they don't want to play a knight, get an extra card, and then 7 out and lose that card and waste the knight. They have the luxury of doing this because if the 8 were to roll, they can simply use the monopoly and take the ore. Now, with this hand, instead of taking the road settle on the 10-3 or the 11-9, they actually decide to port, pop, and drop a road. This is actually the correct play. Taking the road settle on the 11-9 or the 10-3 doesn't do anything for their game, and it disrupts their road integrity, capping them at 14. They need the development card as well, because they're at a point where they're probably not getting road, and they need to get largest army. They cannot let red have both win conditions. Red takes the largest army, but they 7 out. This is huge for black. In this spot, black monopolies the wheat over the ore. Now, I'll explain to you why I think they did this. I think they did this so they could port the wheat, and then they could get the dev and leave sheep in their hand. If they were to have monoed the ore, they would have to port the sheep, buy a dev, and they would have had 2 ore in their hand. If red has a knight, which is pretty likely considering black has 3 VPs, they could simply play that knight and get an ore back. Still, saying all this, if I were black, I would have monoed the ore. The ore is so valuable on this table since your ore is blocked and the 8's rolled a bunch here, so it probably won't roll again in the near future. Taking the wheat, it does the same thing, it stun locks red's hand, but the wheat, they come by much easier than they do the ore. Black buys a development card here, again nothing earth shattering. They play their knight on the 10 instead of the 8. I think they do this because the 8 has rolled a bunch, and they're banking on a 10 rolling here. It ends up not mattering at all, they block the 8 after. Red plays a knight, getting themselves to 7 knights and locking army. This is really, really bad for black because they're probably not going to get road either, and it's very difficult to win without either of the win conditions, that being road and army. Red ports and pops and gets another VP. At this point, it's huge. Knights are meaningless since army is locked. Realistically, if they want a chance to win this game, they'll need the 5th VP as well. Red gets the road builder, which again is huge. They already have road locked. The road builder doesn't do anything for them. They can't unblock their 10, they don't get a VP. This really lets black off the hook. With this hand, a lot of players might just city and get to 12, but this is wrong. They need to hunt for that 5th VP, and look what they do. They hunt for it and they get it. And I do want to mention, they do build a road here, But if they didn't get a VP, they would have poured their wood and they would have gone another time, trying to secure the 5th VP. They get the settlement on the 5 ore. The 5 rolls, which is huge. This all but secures them the game. They get a winning roll and they road settle for the win. This was only possible because they were able to get all 5 VPs. Without all 5 VPs, they probably would have lost the game. Once again, I'd love to give a huge shout out to Hangmain right here. They're a great player. I love reviewing their games. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more.